Hello and welcome to our weekly look at events inside Syria. I'm Rida Fakhri. On Saturday, foreign ministers from several countries, including the United States, Britain, France and key Syrian allies Russia and China, met in Geneva to discuss a new proposal for Syria brokered by the UN and Arab League envoy Kofi Annan. Annan's proposal calls for the formation of a transitional government, paving the way for multi-party elections with an offer for significant international funding to rebuild the war-torn country. Now, although the proposal is supported by some of the major powers, Russia warned that it should not predetermine President Assad's fate. Cal Perry has more.
Even before the meeting began, the optimism was not running high.
We haven't reached agreement in advance with Russia and China. That remains very difficult. I don't know whether it will be possible to do so. In the interest of saving thousands of lives and of our international responsibilities, we will try to do so.
There's a clear diplomatic split. The US and Britain want President Assad to go. Russia and China, as they have said repeatedly, do not want foreign powers meddling in Syria's internal affairs, which has created more skepticism over comments made by Kofi Annan 24 hours earlier, when he said he was, quote, optimistic that the meeting would end with what he called an acceptable result. Officials from the US delegation have reportedly described the meetings as, quote, challenging, and the US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton decided to pass up the chance of making any public comments before the meeting. The lack of optimism felt in diplomatic circles has manifested itself in a complete lack of faith on the streets of Damascus.
It will be just the same as previous meetings. We expect nothing of it. It's a waste of time.
We expect a firm stand in support of states that have their own rights. There should be a firm stand to prevent any external or military intervention, no matter what the case is, and to leave the political solution to Syrian people and the Syrian factions.
As smoke rises over the capital and the death toll rises on both sides, there's a sense that what's needed is less talk and more action. Cal Perry for Inside Syria.
Let's discuss all this with our guests in Rome. Bassam Aimadi, member of the Foreign Relations Committee at the Syrian National Council and former Syrian ambassador to Sweden. In Dubai, Robert Jordan, former US ambassador to Saudi Arabia. And joining us from London, Alexander Nekrasov, former political advisor to the Kremlin. Bassam Aimadi, isn't there an inherent contradiction in what the United Nations is trying to achieve? Kofi Annan, on the one hand, talks about the need for this to be a Syrian-led transitional process, yet all these efforts we're currently seeing in Geneva and before that suggest that this is anything but Syrian-led. The Syrian government's not invited, neither is the opposition. For this to be Syrian-led, for this to be a credible settlement plan, should the two protagonists, the opposition and the government, be included?
First of all, allow me to say that today the regime has perpetrated yet another massacre in Douma. It's one of the massacres that have been committed in all over Syria, and we hope that a solution would be found soon to stop these massacres. Now, to come back to your question, you are right in what you are saying. It seems like a contradiction. Nobody has been invited. And the question is whether any side, whether the regime itself or the opposition inside and outside, will accept what is going to be the outcome of this meeting in Geneva. But we should remember that the regime did not implement any of the items of an Annan plan, which seemed to be the basis of this meeting in Geneva.
Neither has the opposition, though, which is still fighting on the ground. Let me ask you this, then, very bluntly. This latest proposal builds very clearly on Annan's six-point plan, which talks about, and I quote, an inclusive Syrian-led political process to address the legitimate aspirations and concerns of the Syrian people. Does the SNC, then, the Syrian National Council, accept the idea of a transitional process that includes current members of the government?
Nobody in Syria, neither the SNC, nor people on the ground, nor revolutionaries, nor the Free Syrian Army would accept one man of the present regime to continue having any position in the future of Syria. It's enough. 40 years, Syrian people have been objected to all kinds of torture, of dictatorship, and now it's enough. Enough is enough.
Are you saying you are against a negotiated settlement? Because what is the solution? How many more Syrians on both sides are you willing to sacrifice to see the toppling of the regime, which is what you are saying needs to happen?
Yeah, this is exactly the point. This is exactly the point. Too many people have been killed, many people have been injured, and many people were imprisoned and exiled outside Syria. This is a high price. It should be a good price for a new Syria, not to have a compromise that would mean that Syria will go back to tyranny the way it is being ruled now.
Yet
so
you seem to reject, yet to be clear, you seem to reject a negotiated settlement that allows for all the players to join together in a new government.
Well, any negotiated solution should be negotiation on handing over the power from the present regime to a transitional government that is composed of everybody from inside and outside, but all those who have been in the regime should be excluded from such government.
Robert Jordan, let me ask you this. Looking at the context within which these current talks are taking place in Geneva, all of the international players who are involved, to many looking at this from the outside, it may seem idealistic, not to say surreal, perhaps even absurd, some would say, to allow these foreign powers, quote unquote, to determine the future of the country when the main players are at it day in, day out, fighting each other?
Well, I think that's perhaps not exactly the way to characterize it. It's clear to me that the powers are meeting to create the conditions under which some sort of transitional government can occur. They're trying to probe and see what can be acceptable. It doesn't mean that the various opposing Syrian parties need to be there.
Acceptable to whom, though? I mean, clearly, this process,
Kofi Annan, obviously, we've just heard
Kofi Annan
that
himself, Mr. Jordan, has said that this process has to culminate in meeting the aspirations of the Syrian people. Is it then for Washington, London, Paris, and some regional powers to determine what the aspirations of the Syrian people are? Or is it for the Syrians themselves?
Well, I think you have to view this over the proper time frame. No one expected this meeting in Geneva to end up with some sort of new constitution for Syria that would implement regime change overnight. Obviously, down the line, that's going to have to occur. But the major powers all have national interests in what goes on. It's not unreasonable for them to try to hash out where the disagreement lies and where the solutions might lie.
Is this all a sideshow, then?
This is indeed in the interest of the Syrian people in the final analysis.
Would you agree then that this is all a sideshow because these lofty goals don't appear to mesh with the reality on the ground?
It's not a sideshow when the great powers that are meeting, including the Arab powers who are there, would have a divergence of opinion that needs to be ironed out. Once their opinions have been understood by each other, there may be common ground, and there may be common ground to go to both the opposition and the government of Syria and say, here's what we believe, give us your best offer in terms of what we can accomplish here. But as you've just heard, certainly the opposition has no interest in negotiation right now. So someone's got to be trying to break the logjam, and I think that's a laudable goal to attempt to achieve.
Alexander Nekrasov, can any transition plan be imposed by outside forces because the Kremlin clearly believes no? Is it really then up to China and Russia to pressure the Syrian government into some kind of an agreement, or is it simply convenient to put the onus on these two countries and to continue the inertia that exists?
Well, I think, first of all, that any diplomatic effort should be welcome. And I think this conference should be welcome simply because if we would have seen 5 major powers in the world not doing anything, that would have been much more worrying than at least trying to do something. Secondly, I think the rhetoric has to change. I think really the Western powers really need to look at what they're saying. They're basically encouraging all the extremists on the ground to become even more aggressive. And, you know, to be honest with you, it really sounds like a Soviet type of diplomacy, which Hillary Clinton and William Hague are conducting. All this posturing and all this sort of dramatization, they really need to calm down and sort of have a look at what is going on.
What
and
about
stop
the
blaming
Russian? What
Russia
about
and
the
China.
Russian position, though? Because it does seem still to be shrouded in some mystery. Many are wondering whether or not Russia has now reached the point where it may give up its strong support of Bashar al-Assad. Are we at that stage yet, or not?
Well, first of all, listen. Russia is saying that it's not planning to keep Assad in power. That's very important, because a lot of Western officials and commentators are saying, well, Russia is trying to keep him in power. No way. And Russia has never said that. And also it's important to understand that China is supporting Russia. And also many Western commentators and officials are always blaming Russia, forgetting to mention that China is on board as well. Secondly, it is very important to remember what happened in Libya, with all its talk about democracy and so on, freedom and so on and so on, and now we have a hellhole in Libya. And that is why everybody has to have a calm approach. Everybody has to step back and think how they can influence the people that they have influence over. For example, the West obviously has influence over the opposition. Now, why don't they talk to them? We have just heard the member of the opposition saying, no way we're going to talk to anybody. This sort of position will not help anybody. So Russia and China should be talking to Assad, and the Western nations should be talking to the opposition. If they don't influence those two sides, this conflict will drag on forever.
Many will indeed be looking at the opposition, Bassam Aimadi, to see whether or not you can put enough pressure on those fighting the government in Syria to stop the fighting, to lay down their arms, because it would seem to many that we are putting the cart ahead of the horse. Who is going to ensure that the fighting does stop? How much direct control and influence do you, within the SNC, have over the so-called Free Syrian Army doing much of the fighting on the ground against the government?
Well, I'm sorry to say that these truths are brought upside down. First of all, let me remind your guest in Moscow. He's talking about extremists on the ground. For God's sake, who is extremist? Is it the regime who is killing thousands of people every day and shelling towns and cities? Or is it the people who are defending themselves? It seems he doesn't see the truth. He needs to be shown the truth. He should go to Syria and see for himself how many people have been killed, how many buildings have been damaged, how many cities and towns have been destroyed by the regime.
Let me just interrupt you. Let me interrupt you briefly to say what Kofi Annan has mentioned in his introductory remarks in Geneva. He has in fact spoken, and perhaps for the first time, of international terrorism. He's even spoken of so-called insidious weapons making their way into Syria and complicating the situation. But coming back to my question, and it was a very specific one, how much control do you have over the Free Syrian Army?
Well, let me say that what you said before, if there are organizations coming into Syria, it's because, and the reason for that is the inactivity of the international community, and it's the result of letting the Syrian people suffer under this regime, so that they allowed some other forces to come to help the Syrians who are being killed every day.
But Mr. Aimadi, do you control the Free Syrian Army?
Yes.
Who controls it?
Now, there are forces inside Syria. Why should we control them? They are the people who made the revolution. Why should we, a bunch of people living outside, order the people inside to stop defending themselves? It's illogical to do that. Why don't the Russians tell Bashar Assad to stop fire and take his tanks and forces out of the cities the way that Annan planned has demanded from him? Why don't they have this influence over Assad and his thugs and his security forces who are killing every day over 200 people? Why do you address us to tell us to stop people from defending themselves?
So you are saying you have no control over the situation. I understand from your statement as well that you do not think that this should be a Syrian-led process, that this should be up to what Moscow, Washington, Paris and others want.
We are saying that the approach is different. You are talking to the victim, telling the victim to stop defending themselves. It's the regime who is doing all the massacres, doing all the killing. Remember that for 10 months people demonstrated very peacefully, and only today in Duma there are only peaceful people demonstrating, and the regime went and committed another massacre. This is what we have been trying to tell the world. But it seems the world wants to listen to what they want to listen to.
Mr. Jordan, do you see any... forgive me for interrupting you, but if I can just ask Mr. Jordan, from your perspective, looking at what Washington and others might want to see come out of this whole process, is there any room for a negotiated solution? Because obviously there are those fighting on the ground, those who have no control over them, those who believe that force is the only way out of this.
Well, there is room for negotiation, but it's going to be inch by inch and probably month by month, and sadly many people will die in the process. The room for negotiation is that there has been talk, as Kofi Annan has suggested, of a transitional government. All of the parties meeting today seem to support the concept of a transitional government. I take it at face value that the Russians are not fixated on keeping Bashar al-Assad in power forever. They want a relationship with the Syrian people and the Syrian government that survives down the line, whatever that is. And so how do you get there? You get there by incremental discussions. The Russians and Chinese with Assad, the British, Americans, and some of the Arab nations with the opposition. But there has to be a sense that there is a goal here that everyone's working toward. And I think that's also the product of private discussions, for example, that Hillary Clinton had with Foreign Minister Lavrov in St. Petersburg a couple of days ago. There will be a lot of those off-the-record sidebar conversations that I think are going to be very important.
You don't mention Iran, even though some may point to Iran as being the one regional player which could have considerable influence on the Damascus government. Yet, is Washington really interested in a negotiated settlement? And if it were, why not allow Iran then to exert some constructive pressure here on President Assad to try to push this forward toward a settlement?
Good question. I have no reason to believe that Iran couldn't perhaps make some constructive suggestions here as well. They have clearly an interest in not only Syria but other venues in the territory.
What about Russia then? Alexander Nekrasov, what are the red lines for Moscow at this stage? Is it going to at one point say to itself it's better to maintain and safeguard our interests by somehow maintaining the structure that exists within the government, the Ba'athist elements that we have cultivated throughout these years, and let go perhaps of our hold on President Assad?
I don't think that the situation is such that Russia is thinking we need to cling to President Assad, whatever happens. First of all, how do you actually allow this situation to develop without any sort of government in place? There will be total chaos. There will be even more people killed. Secondly, the opposition itself, we just heard, is saying that it doesn't really control the Free Syrian Army. And it doesn't really control all those elements that are penetrating the country from abroad. Does it know about the arms shipments to this Free Syrian Army? Does it know that there are countries outside that are supplying them with arms? That is also issues that are complicating the whole picture here. And I think another major problem here is that many countries are doing a lot of public relations, but doing a lot of PR when they are, and I mean the Western countries, by the way, when they are talking about the situation there, saying about the crimes of Assad, that he should be punished, and so on and so on and so on. This doesn't help. This has to be a calm approach. Everybody has to step back and think what can be done. If we continue this PR game, it will never end.
Mr. Imadi, then, does it help to hear the UK's Foreign Minister, William Hague, say that the issue of accountability for crimes has to be part of this transitional process? Is it for the United Kingdom or for anyone else to decide what kind of justice the Syrians are going to opt for? Or is it for you to decide once and if you do gain control of this country?
Well, of course, Britain and other countries are part of the international community, and we in Syria live in this international community. We are part of it, so perhaps we can work together to put those people to accountability, and we hope we could do that. But let me please refer to what your guest in Moscow said about the shipments of arms, as if he doesn't know that his government has shipped millions of tons of arms since the start of the revolution, and he mentions only a few arms being smuggled from outside. Syria. I don't know how he can. It seems that some people in Russia are also away from the truth.
This is rubbish.
It seems that the way Bashar Assad is out of this world, he's living on another planet. It seems some of the Russian people also, or the government of Russia, are also living on another planet. They don't see the reality.
But listen, the opposition, Mr. Imadi, the opposition in fairness is being armed as well. It is widely reported that countries such as Saudi Arabia, if you'd allow me, and Qatar are arming the opposition. Kofi Annan himself has said this cannot be helpful. He has said this is simply helping to encourage the violence that is taking shape in your country. If you do inherit Syria at the end of all this, what kind of Syria will you be getting? Are you at all concerned about the state Syria will look like when you look at the Libya scenario and the state that country is in? Does it give you pause for reflection? Do you think the country will be a fractured country?
Do you think it's also helpful for Russia to give Assad so many arms? Is it helpful for Iran and Iraq and Hezbollah to send him men and arms and snipers to kill the people when they are going to buy their bread and butter? It's something I said from beginning. This is the wrong approach. You should look at the things the way they are going on in the ground. And I wanted to say just a few days ago, the Free Syrian Army has attacked the Republican guards in their barracks. So sooner or later, this regime is falling. And Russia would lose everything because they are partners now with the Iranians in killing the Syrian people. Just a few days later, a few months, few weeks, God knows when, the regime will fall and everybody will realize that everybody was wrong in their approach to this issue. This issue is an issue of people struggling to have their lives and dignity back to them after it has been hijacked by this regime. So what's going to happen in Syria is not like what is going on in Libya now. In Syria, there are people on the ground who are going to control the country and bring justice and peace and stability in Syria, instead of having a regime that is causing problems and fires everywhere around.
But it is not at all clear how, Mr. Imadi, if I can put this question to Mr. Jordan, just hearing the rhetoric by the opposition, looking at the state of disunity that exists within the opposition, 16 months into this whole crisis, what kind of alternative do you think there will be to President Bashar al-Assad's government? How concerned will Washington be? Will it prefer to see a weakened leadership in place, or perhaps a more unpredictable alternative?
I think the alternative is unpredictable right now, just as it is in Libya. And I think you have a great danger that any revolution can be hijacked by extremists. We don't know if that's going to happen here or not. I share Kofi Annan's concern that weapons are getting into Syria, perhaps into the wrong hands. And so it's very important to understand who the Free Syrian Army are, who the other opposition elements are. They, in many cases, don't even agree among themselves, and I think that's a serious danger as well. So they're fragmented. There seems to be no appetite for conciliation, and it may be that the opposition is going to have to take some cities, to perhaps have some military victories before they're strong enough to represent a significant threat in the short term. In the meantime, I think the great powers have to keep talking. The neighbors in the neighborhood have to keep talking and find ways to minimize the chances of catastrophe here. It's already a humanitarian catastrophe and 16,000 people have died, but it can get worse.
Alexander Nekrasov, just how much worse can it get? How do you see the situation playing itself out? Can this plan succeed if there isn't some kind of a face-saving scenario put in place for President Bashar al-Assad that may resemble perhaps the scenario that was adopted in Yemen?
Well, first of all, Yemen didn't work because Al-Qaeda is on the growth there, so let's leave them in their own. But when I hear opposition leaders talking in propaganda language like that, saying that Russia is helping Iran and President Assad to kill people when they're buying bread, this is propaganda, black PR. This doesn't work anymore. And if they continue to talk like this, nothing will happen. I'm actually quite amazed that a leader of the opposition in Syria is so uninformed and so aggressive towards any sort of dialogue that can take place. And until this happens, until the opposition, basically we don't even know who they are, and when we hear that the council doesn't even know who the Syrian army are. So I think this situation will not improve at all. Kofi Annan can produce more plans, but until all the sides in the conflict start to realize that they have to be realistic, that they have to stop this propaganda war, which does not, by the way, benefit anybody, and understand one thing, that Russia and China do not want President Assad to stay on forever. They want to find a way out of this war. And unfortunately, at the moment, the West is not helping.
And on this note, let me thank my guests in Rome, Bassam Aimadi, in Dubai, Robert Jordan, and in London, Alexander Nekrasov. And thank you for watching. Those who want to watch the program again can go online to our website at al-Jazeera.com. That's all from the Inside Syria team for now. From me, Rida Fakhri, and the entire team, thanks for watching.